I had it for about 6 months. It had to wear off. So I did learn a lesson.
What really happened between Murray and the co-stars who found themselves on his bad side? And why did some of Hollywood's biggest names swear they'd never share a set with him again? The hidden truths behind these creative partnerships will leave you stunned. From Saturday Night Live to Ghostbusters, Caddyshack to Lost in Translation, Murray's on-screen presence defined generations of comedy. The public saw the effortless humor, the scene-stealing one-liners, the charming rebel who seemed impossible not to love. What they didn't see were the cold stares between takes, the creative power struggles, and the relationships that disintegrated under the weight of Murray's particular brand of artistic intensity. The laughter you heard covered fractures no one dared mention until now. But here's where it gets complicated. Murray wasn't simply a difficult star with an ego problem. By many accounts, he was a perfectionist whose commitment to authentic performance sometimes manifested as behavior others found impossible to navigate. Bill doesn't have a process, one longtime collaborator reportedly said. He has an anti-process, and when you're working with someone who refuses to acknowledge the normal rules of engagement, it either creates magic or absolute chaos. Throughout his nearly 5-decade career, Murray developed a reputation for being simultaneously brilliant and maddening, a contradiction that eventually spilled into public view through a series of creative partnerships that combusted spectacularly. If you had been on those sets during the worst moments, you'd have felt the temperature drop to Arctic levels. You'd have witnessed the smiles vanish once the camera stopped rolling. Cold, hard cash often played its part too. Hollywood's hierarchy of star power meant Murray frequently commanded higher salaries and more creative control than his co-stars, a disparity that could turn any creative disagreement into something far more charged. When millions of dollars and career trajectories hung in the balance, artistic differences rarely remained just that. The Murray mythology grew over time, the actor without an agent who communicated through a mysterious 1-800 number, the unpredictable force who might show up for a role or simply vanish, the improviser who threw away scripts and followed his instincts regardless of others' preparation. These eccentricities became part of his charm for audiences, but for certain co-stars, they represented something else entirely, a fundamental disrespect for their craft. Let's pull back the curtain on 5 relationships that started with creative promise and ended with bitter words and cold shoulders. 5 partnerships that remind us how thin the line can be between brilliant collaboration and irreconcilable differences. 5 co-stars who reportedly found themselves on the receiving end of Murray's particular brand of creative chaos. Chevy Chase, the rivalry that turned physical. It began as comedy's dream team, 2 rising stars from the revolutionary Saturday Night Live cast who seemed poised to reinvent Hollywood comedy for a new generation. Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, one the dry-witted newcomer who replaced the other after Chase's abrupt departure from SNL to pursue movie stardom. What few realized was how quickly their professional rivalry would evolve into something deeper and more personal. Behind the scenes at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, tension simmered. Murray reportedly viewed Chase as entitled and arrogant, a born wealthy comedian who abandoned the show at the first hint of bigger opportunities. Chase, according to insiders, saw Murray as the upstart replacement, talented, yes, but forever standing in the spotlight that had once been his. These weren't just 2 comics with different styles, one SNL writer reportedly recalled. These were 2 fundamentally different personalities on a collision course. The breaking point came in 1978 when Chase returned to host SNL. What should have been a homecoming turned into something else entirely. According to multiple witnesses and later confirmed by both men, a verbal altercation erupted backstage minutes before the live broadcast. Insults flew about each other's talent, appearance, and comedic abilities. Then came the moment that would cement their feud in comedy lore. The exchange reportedly turned physical. It was a full-on fight, one cast member later told the press. Not just shoving, punches were thrown. Others described how it took multiple people to separate the 2 comedy giants as the clock ticked down to the live show. Remarkably, both men pulled themselves together enough to perform, their professionalism momentarily overriding their mutual animosity. But the damage was done. What makes this rivalry particularly fascinating is how it evolved over time. Years later, they would reunite on the set of Caddyshack, their characters barely sharing screen time, a deliberate choice, according to the film's director, to keep peace on set. Their brief interactions in that comedy classic crackle with an energy that goes beyond acting. If you watch closely during their few scenes together, you can almost see the ice forming between them. Over the decades, both men occasionally addressed their famous feud. Chase once told a reporter, "We've made peace, but at that time, I would have gladly hit him with a shovel." Murray, with his characteristic sardonic tone, noted in an interview years later, "It's all ancient history. We were younger, dumber, and considerably more chemically altered." But friends of both comedians suggest the relationship never fully warmed. The irony wasn't lost on Hollywood insiders. Two men whose careers were built on making audiences laugh couldn't find much humor in each other's company. Their creative partnership, brief as it was, remained defined not by their collaborative triumphs, but by a backstage brawl that became the stuff of entertainment legend. Sometimes in Hollywood, the most memorable performances happen when the cameras aren't rolling at all. Lucy Liu, Charlie's Angel with a breaking point. The millennium had just turned. Charlie's Angels was redefining action comedy for a new generation with its stylish take on the 70s television classic. Enter Bill Murray as Bosley, the Angels' liaison to the mysterious Charlie. On paper, it was perfect casting, Murray's sardonic wit providing the perfect counterbalance to the high-octane action sequences. Nobody suspected the set would become a battleground between Murray and one of the film's stars, Lucy Liu. What began as creative tension reportedly escalated during a scene rehearsal. According to several crew members who witnessed the incident, Murray expressed dissatisfaction with a particular scene, allegedly singling out Liu's performance. "I wouldn't call it constructive criticism," one production assistant later told a film blogger. "It was more like a complete dismissal of her abilities." Liu, by all accounts, refused to simply absorb the criticism. Sources claim she stood her ground, defending both her performance and her place in the production. The exchange reportedly became heated enough that production temporarily halted. "You could hear a pin drop on set," one crew member recalled. Nobody knew what to do. These were two major stars in a very public standoff. Behind the curtain, power dynamics complicated matters. Murray was the established comedy legend with decades of box office successes. Liu, while already an established actress, was still building her leading role credentials in Hollywood. The salary gap between them was reportedly substantial, a common Hollywood reality that often added an unspoken tension to any creative disagreement. The aftermath transformed the production. According to multiple sources, the two barely spoke except when absolutely necessary for their scenes. The natural chemistry that should have existed between their characters had to be manufactured through careful editing and scene construction. The director earned every penny on that film, one executive reportedly quipped, turning open hostility into something that looked like camaraderie on screen. When Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, entered production, Murray's Bosley was noticeably absent, replaced by Bernie Mac. The official line cited scheduling conflicts, but industry insiders pointed to the Liu incident as the real reason. One production source reportedly said, "Everyone knew Bill wasn't coming back. The question was just how they'd write around it." Liu addressed the incident years later in interviews, confirming a confrontation occurred, but disputing some of the more dramatic details that had circulated. "I stood up for myself and I don't regret it," she told one interviewer. "I'm not going to sit there and be attacked." Murray, characteristically, has said little publicly about the specific incident, though he has occasionally acknowledged his reputation for challenging behavior on sets. What came next wasn't a spat, it was a fracture. The two stars have apparently never worked together again, their paths in Hollywood carefully routed to avoid intersection. Their brief creative partnership stands as a reminder that in Hollywood, personality conflicts can derail even the most promising projects, and that sometimes the price of standing one's ground is a burnt bridge that never gets rebuilt. Richard Dreyfuss, what about Bob? The early 1990s saw Murray at a creative crossroads, having proven himself as both a comedic force and a box office draw. He was increasingly drawn to roles with more dramatic texture. What about Bob? A dark comedy about a psychiatric patient who follows his therapist on vacation seemed the perfect vehicle. Cast opposite the Oscar-winning Richard Dreyfuss, Murray appeared set for another triumph. Instead, according to multiple accounts, the production devolved into one of Hollywood's most notorious hostile work environments. From the beginning, creative tensions emerged. Dreyfuss, known for his meticulous preparation and technique, reportedly clashed with Murray's improvisational style. It was like watching a methodical chess player trying to compete with someone who kept flipping the board, one crew member later told an entertainment magazine. Two completely different approaches to the craft on a collision course. What began as professional friction allegedly escalated into personal animosity. According to production sources, Murray began to improvise not just dialogue, but physical comedy elements that Dreyfuss hadn't prepared for. The line between acting and antagonizing became very blurred, one assistant director reportedly recalled. There were takes where Richard genuinely looked uncomfortable because he didn't know what Bill was going to do next. One incident in particular has become Hollywood legend, though accounts vary on the specifics. During a break in filming, Murray allegedly threw an ashtray near Dreyfuss. Some versions of the story claim it was thrown at Dreyfuss but missed. Others suggest it was more of a dramatic gesture that wasn't intended to make contact. Whatever the truth, the incident reportedly left Dreyfuss shaken and further deteriorated their already strained relationship. Behind the curtain, the film's director, Frank Oz, faced the nearly impossible task of managing the escalating tension while still delivering a commercially viable comedy. Frank earned combat pay on that film. One producer reportedly joked years later. He wasn't just directing a movie, he was negotiating a Cold War. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A film about an irritating personality driving someone to the brink of sanity was itself creating similar dynamics behind the camera. Art imitating life, or perhaps life imitating art. The meta-narrative added another layer of complexity to an already complicated production. Years later, Dreyfuss didn't mince words when discussing the experience. In one particularly candid interview, he allegedly called Murray an Irish drunken bully and described What About Bob as a difficult chapter in his career. Murray, when occasionally pressed about the friction, typically deflected with humor or changed the subject entirely. Despite, or perhaps because of, the backstage drama, What About Bob, became a critical and commercial success, eventually developing a cult following. The tension that made filming so difficult may have actually enhanced the on-screen dynamic between patient and therapist. You won't look at those performances quite the same way after knowing what reportedly transpired when the cameras weren't rolling. The Dreyfuss-Murray creative partnership became yet another casualty of Murray's complicated professional relationships, a one-and-done collaboration that produced memorable cinema but burned bridges in the process. In Hollywood's unwritten rules, some successes come at too high a personal cost to ever repeat. Harold Ramis, when Ghostbusters became ghosted, some creative partnerships defined careers. Bill Murray and Harold Ramis collaborated on some of the most beloved comedies of their generation: Caddyshack, Stripes, Ghostbusters, and finally, Groundhog Day. Their working relationship produced cinema that changed comedy forever, which makes the dissolution of their friendship all the more poignant. A creative divorce that reportedly left both men wounded and led to nearly 2 decades of silence between them. The early years of their collaboration sparkled with possibility. Ramis, the writer-director with the sharp intellect and meticulous approach, complemented Murray's improvisational genius and unpredictable energy. They balanced each other perfectly. One producer who worked with both men told a film historian, Harold provided the structure that allowed Bill's chaos to flourish within boundaries. By the time Groundhog Day entered production in the early 1990s, subtle shifts had altered their dynamic. Murray was increasingly drawn to more dramatic, nuanced roles that explored melancholy and existential questions. Ramos remained committed to smart comedy with heart. These evolving creative identities collided during what would become their final collaboration. According to multiple sources close to the production, tensions flared regularly on the Groundhog Day set. Murray reportedly appeared on set with serious creative concerns about the film's direction. Ramos, as director, had to maintain his vision while accommodating his star's evolving interpretation. It wasn't just artistic differences, one crew member later recalled. It felt personal, like they were speaking different languages after years of perfect communication. The breaking point remains somewhat shrouded in mystery, as neither man has ever fully detailed the final rupture. What is known is that after Groundhog Day, Wrapped, their communication apparently ceased entirely. No more collaborations, no public appearances together, not even mentions of each other in interviews. A creative partnership that had defined American comedy for a generation simply vanished. It was like a divorce, one mutual friend reportedly said years later. And like many divorces, the people closest to them ended up caught in the middle, having to choose sides or carefully navigate both relationships separately. For nearly 20 years, the silence between them continued, an absence that spoke volumes in an industry built on relationships. The Ghostbusters team had experienced a ghosting of its own, one that seemed unlikely to ever resolve. Then came the news of Ramos's declining health. According to family members, Murray made a visit to his former collaborator's home in the final days of Ramos's life in 2014. What transpired during that meeting remains private, a final conversation between two men who had created so much together before their painful separation. At Ramos's funeral, Murray served as a pallbearer, a public gesture of reconciliation that came too late for any professional reunion. When later asked about Ramos, Murray's typically quick wit was replaced by thoughtful reflection. He earned his keep on this planet. God bless him. Their creative partnership, despite its bitter end, produced work that continues to influence generations of filmmakers and comedians. Perhaps the most profound legacy of their collaboration isn't just the films they made together, but the reminder that even the most fruitful creative marriages can fracture under the weight of evolving artistic identities and unresolved personal conflicts. Anjelica Huston, Royal Tenenbaum tension. The world of Wes Anderson films, with their meticulous framing, deadpan delivery, and emotional undercurrents, seemed tailor-made for Bill Murray's later career renaissance. Beginning with Rushmore, Murray found in Anderson a director whose artistic vision complemented his own evolving approach to performance. By the time the Royal Tenenbaums entered production, Murray was firmly established as a member of Anderson's recurring ensemble. His eventual clash with co-star Anjelica Huston, therefore, came as a surprise to many observers. Huston, herself Hollywood royalty and an Oscar-winning actress known for her regal presence and precision, approached filmmaking with a disciplined professionalism. According to production sources, the differences in their working styles became apparent almost immediately. Anjelica comes prepared with every line memorized, every moment planned, one crew member reportedly observed. Bill arrives, ready to discover the scene in the moment. Both approaches can work brilliantly, but they don't always work together. Behind the curtain, Anderson's sets operated with a familial closeness that complicated matters. Many cast members had worked together previously, creating an in-group dynamic that newcomers could find challenging to penetrate. There was definitely a boys' club element at times, one production assistant later claimed in an industry blog. And Anjelica isn't someone who would simply accept being excluded from creative conversations. The tension reportedly crystallized around a particular scene involving both actors. According to multiple sources, Murray began improvising beyond the script's parameters. For many directors, this would be a problem. For Anderson, it was often where the magic happened. Huston, however, allegedly found the constant departures from the established dialogue disruptive to her own carefully constructed performance. It became a philosophical disagreement about the nature of acting itself, one insider told a film journalist years later. Is it better to discover something authentic in the moment, even if it means throwing away what was planned? Or is the real craft in the preparation and execution of a well-designed plan? Neither approach is wrong, but they can be fundamentally incompatible. What came next wasn't a dramatic confrontation, both actors were too professional for that, but rather a cooling that was palpable to those working closely with the production. They were cordial, but the warmth vanished, one makeup artist reportedly recalled. Everything became strictly business. The aftermath manifested in subtle ways. In subsequent Anderson films, Murray and Houston rarely shared significant screen time, despite both continuing to appear in the director's work. Whether this was coincidental or deliberate remains a matter of speculation, but industry insiders noted the pattern. Unlike some of Murray's other creative conflicts, this one never erupted into public view. Both actors maintained professional discretion, never directly addressing any tension in interviews. This silence itself speaks volumes in an industry where relationships often play out in public postmortems. Their creative clash stands as perhaps the most nuanced of Murray's difficult partnerships, less a dramatic rupture than a quiet recognition of incompatible approaches to the craft they both mastered in very different ways. Sometimes in Hollywood, the most revealing conflicts are the ones that never make headlines, but instead play out in the negative spaces of careers that carefully orbit around each other without ever truly reconnecting. Looking across these 5 relationships reveals patterns that go beyond individual personality conflicts. Murray's approach to acting, improvisational, boundary-pushing, sometimes provocative, created brilliant moments on screen while occasionally leaving wreckage in its wake. Bill's genius and Bill's difficulty come from exactly the same place. One director who worked with him multiple times told a film journal, "He's always pushing for something more authentic, more surprising. That's what makes him special on screen and sometimes challenging off it." The question that haunts each broken creative partnership is whether the artistic ends justified the interpersonal means. Murray's performances in these contested projects stand among his most memorable work. The tension with Dreyfuss somehow enhanced the maddening dynamic of What About Bob? The fraught Groundhog Day production with Ramis resulted in what many critics consider one of the finest comedies ever made. Even Charlie's Angels, despite the reported conflict with Liu, delivered exactly the popcorn entertainment it promised. Behind the curtain, a more complex picture emerges of an artist whose commitment to his particular vision sometimes came at others' expense. There's a generational element to it, one producer noted in a recent interview. Murray came up in an era where difficult behavior was often excused as artistic temperament. Today's sets have different expectations around collaboration and respect. Murray himself has occasionally reflected on his reputation with characteristic dry wit. "I'm just trying to make the movie better," he told one interviewer. Sometimes that means not doing exactly what's expected. In rare moments of candor, he's acknowledged regrets about certain relationships that fractured under the weight of creative differences. What makes Murray's case particularly fascinating is how his difficult reputation paradoxically exists alongside countless stories of his generosity, spontaneity, and kindness. For every co-star who found him impossible, others describe transformative, joyful collaborations. Sofia Coppola, who directed his Oscar-nominated performance in Lost in Translation, has spoken glowingly about their creative partnership. Younger actors like Jason Schwartzman have described Murray as a supportive, generous scene partner. This contradiction, the impossible colleague and the beloved collaborator, suggests that Murray's conflicts may have been as much about specific chemistry as about any inherent difficulty. Certain creative combinations ignited while others combusted, with little middle ground between triumph and disaster. In recent years, reports suggest Murray has evolved. "There's a wisdom that comes with age," one recent director observed. "He still pushes for the unexpected moment, but there seems to be more awareness of how that impact ripples through a production." In the end, Bill Murray and the co-stars who found themselves at odds with him gave us moments that still sparkle on screen. But the price of that shine, The tension, the confrontations, the burned bridges left scars that time has only partially healed. Maybe that's the real story here. In an industry built on the illusion of effortless magic, even the most brilliant collaborations sometimes succeed, not because of harmony, but because of the creative friction that threatens to tear them apart. If this deep dive into Hollywood's complicated relationships hit home, you know what to do. Stick around. We've got more industry, truths to tell,